Maya Rodriguez stood behind the glass window and watched the man who killed her brother. His name was Gregory Kane, and he was a police officer. He sat in the small room with his hands on the table. He looked calm, like nothing bad had happened. 3 weeks ago, Kane shot her brother Carlos during a traffic stop. Carlos was driving home from work at the water plant. He had no weapon and he did nothing wrong. But Kane saw a young man with dark skin in an old car and decided that was enough reason to pull him over. Kane shot him 3 times in the chest. Carlos died on the road while Kane called for backup and said it was self-defense. The police cleared Kane in 2 days. They said he acted correctly and used reasonable force. The video from his body camera got corrupted somehow. The people who saw what happened were told to keep quiet, or they had to move away from the station. Maya watched the system she believed in protect a killer. She joined the military to help people and keep them safe. She wanted to make sure justice happened in the colonies where humans were building new homes among the stars. But now she understood that justice was fake. The system was broken and it protected bad people. If she wanted to honor Carlos, then she had to break the system even more. Commander Franklin Hayes came and stood next to her. He used to work with Carlos at the water plant before he moved to station security. People called him old-fashioned because he still believed people should be punished when they did wrong things. He did not say anything, but he pushed a small data chip toward her on the window ledge. Maya looked at it and then looked at him. His voice was very quiet. This is the real body camera video. Everything Kane did is on here. Everything the police hid from everyone. I could lose my job for giving you this, but Carlos deserves better than their lies. Maya took the chip and held it tight. It felt heavy and cold like justice itself. She had a choice now. She could release this video and let everyone see the truth. Maybe Kane would lose his job or go to prison. Or she could do something bigger. Something that would send a message across all the colonies that humans needed to be better, and that evil people would face punishment even in space where there were no rules. Through the glass, Kane was being let go. His lawyer shook his hand and smiled. He would go back to work next week. In 6 months, he would probably kill someone else and the system would protect him again. Maya felt something hard form inside her heart, like ice turning to stone. She put the chip in her pocket and turned to Hayes. I need your help with something. The government will not like it. It will probably end both our careers. Hayes looked at her for a long moment and then nodded once. For Carlos, he said. For Carlos, Maya agreed. Over the next week, Maya made her plan. She could not just kill Kane and call it justice. That would make her a murderer like him. She needed something smarter. Something that would show everyone how corrupt the system was while making sure Kane got punished in a way he could never escape. She started by learning about the weak points in the station security. Europa Station was big and handled thousands of travelers and cargo every day. Security was tight, but Maya had military access and she knew how everything worked. More important, she knew people who lived in the gray areas between legal and illegal. Her first contact was Lieutenant Kenji Sato, who worked in cyber warfare and owed her a favor from when they served on Mars together. They met in a tunnel under the farm dome where the sound of water machines covered their voices. Kenji listened to her plan without stopping her. You want to take over the public broadcast system, not just on this station, but every colony and every ship and every military base within 3 light years. You want to force everyone to watch the truth. Kenji shook his head slowly. That is crazy. That will get you court-martialed. That is treason against the government. Maya looked at him steadily. Carlos was 23 years old. He wanted to be an engineer. He wanted to help make Titan livable for humans. He died begging for his life while Kane shot him. So yes, I want to commit treason. Will you help me? Kenji stayed quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out his computer. I need 3 days and access to the main communication tower. And Maya, after this, we can never come back. She nodded. I know. Her second contact was harder to find. Captain Nicole Palmer ran a cargo ship that flew through the asteroid belt. She was a smuggler, though she called herself an independent contractor. She also used to be Maya's girlfriend from the academy, before Maya chose the military and Nicole chose freedom. They met in a dirty bar on the industrial level where workers drank after their shifts. Nicole looked older than Maya remembered. Her eyes were hard now. She listened to Maya with a small smile. So you want me to help a terrorist escape and smuggle you past government blockades and maybe start a war between colonies? And what do you give me for this? Maya pushed a credit chip across the table. Everything I have saved. 20 years of military pay. Nicole did not touch it. Keep your money, Rodriguez. I will do it because what happened to Carlos was wrong. And maybe you can make them scared enough to think twice before doing it again. But you need to understand something. You are not a soldier anymore. You are starting a revolution. And revolutions are messy. Maya understood. Over 2 weeks, her team grew bigger. Hayes brought Sergeant Danny Pierce, who lost his daughter to police violence on Earth. Kenji found Lisa Chen, who was a communications engineer who could break any code. Each person joined for their own reasons, but they all had one thing the same. They saw the system fail, and they were willing to burn it down to build something better. The planning took time and care. They would broadcast the real video of Carlos being murdered across every government channel at the same time, so no one could stop it. But that was just the start. Maya had studied Kane's history and found sealed records and talked to victims who were too afraid to speak before. Kane was not just a killer. He was a serial predator protected by a system designed to shield bad cops. She put everything together in one file. Names and dates and body counts. 12 people dead over 6 years. All of them minorities. All of them unarmed. All cases closed as justified. The evidence was horrible. The truth was monstrous. And Maya was going to make sure everyone saw it. The night before the operation, she visited Carlos's memorial in the station garden. His hologram smiled at her, frozen at 23, full of hope and dreams that would never happen. She put her hand on the cold stone. I am doing this for you. But I am also doing it for everyone who comes after. They need to know that humans can be better, that we have to be better, or we will carry Earth's worst problems to every star we reach. She walked away into the artificial night, ready to become either a hero or a monster, depending on who told the story later. The communication tower sat at the top of Europa Station like a needle pointing at the stars. Maya and her team wore fake maintenance uniforms that Kenji made for them. They walked through security at 3 in the morning when the guards were tired and not paying attention. The guards saw their badges and let them pass without asking questions. Military training and confidence could open doors better than any key. They rode the elevator to the control room, where Lisa Chen started working on the security system right away, while Kenji got the broadcast ready. Hayes and Pierce stood by the door to watch for trouble. Maya looked at the clock and her heart beat fast like when she was in combat. In 15 minutes, they would either change everything or die trying. Maybe both would happen. Lisa's fingers moved across the computer screen and code flowed past faster than Maya could read. The girl was smart and taught herself everything from a refugee camp on Ganymede. She worked with focus like someone who knew what failure meant. 3 minutes later, she looked up. We are in. Full access to the government communication network. Every channel and every frequency and every connected device from here to Mars. Once I turn this on, there is no stopping it. No taking it back. No deleting it. It spreads through every tower automatically. Maya took a deep breath. Do it. Lisa pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then across Europa Station and beyond, every screen changed. Public displays and personal tablets and ship monitors and military command centers. All of them at the same time showed Maya's face. My name is Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez from the Colonial Defense Force. 3 weeks ago, my brother Carlos Rodriguez was murdered by Officer Gregory Kane of the government police during a traffic stop. Carlos had no weapon. He was innocent. The official investigation cleared Kane and hid evidence. What you are about to see is the real body camera video from that night. I want you to watch. I want you to remember. And I want you to ask yourself if this is the humanity we want to bring to the stars. The video started. Maya did not watch it. She had seen it so many times that every moment was burned into her memory. Carlos's nervous smile as Kane walked to his car. The angry questions. The fake suspicion. Carlos reaching slowly for his identification exactly as Kane told him to. And then Kane pulling his gun and shooting. 3 shots. Center of the chest. Professional. Efficient. Murder. Carlos's last words were hard to hear over the sound. Please. I did not do anything. Please. The video ended. Maya's face came back on the screens. That was Carlos Rodriguez, age 23, student, worker, brother, son, human being. Officer Kane has killed 11 other people the same way over the past 6 years. All minorities. All unarmed. All cases closed as justified force. The evidence is now on a public server. Download it, share it. Demand people be held responsible. Because if we cannot get justice through legal ways, then we must ask ourselves what our laws are for. She stopped and let her words spread across millions of viewers. The government will call this terrorism. They will call me a traitor. Maybe they are right. But I would rather be a traitor to a corrupt system than help its crimes. Humanity survived extinction. We won against space. We built cities on worlds that tried to kill us. We did not come this far and sacrifice this much to poison the future, with the same hate that almost destroyed Earth. My brother deserved better. All of Cain's victims deserved better. And if the system will not give justice, then I will. The broadcast ended. Alarms started screaming through the communication center. Lisa scrambled the computer and wiped their digital tracks as much as she could. Hayes spoke calmly into his radio. "Palmer, we are ready to leave. Pick us up at Point Beta in 3 minutes." They ran. Security would be coming to their position in minutes, but the station was in chaos. Public screens still showed the server address where Maya uploaded all of Cain's files. People were downloading it and sharing it faster than any authority could stop. The truth was spreading now and impossible to hold back. They got to the service dock where Palmer's ship, the Defiant Wind, was waiting with engines hot. The cargo door was already coming down. Security forces showed up at the far end of the hall with weapons raised. Pierce shot back at them while the others got on board. Hayes was the last one up the ramp and took a plasma shot to the shoulder as the ramp closed. Palmer did not wait for permission. She fired the engines and the Defiant Wind tore away from Europa Station like a bullet. Government patrol ships tried to catch them, but Palmer had spent her whole life running from authorities. She dove into the asteroid belt using the chaos of spinning rocks and ice to break their tracking. In the cargo bay, Maya watched Europa Station get smaller through the window. Behind them, millions of people were dealing with what they just saw. Some would call her a hero. Some would call her a terrorist. Most would just call her human. A human who decided that enough was enough, and that staying quiet made you guilty too, and that justice delayed was the same as justice denied. She had crossed a line tonight. There was no going back. But when she looked at herself in the glass, she felt no regret. Only the hard determination of someone who chose to stand when the world told her to kneel. The government would hunt her now, but they would also have to answer for what she exposed. And that Maya thought was justice enough. The Defiant Wind moved toward the outer system with its hull marked from close calls with government patrol ships. In the small medical bay, Danny Pierce worked on Hayes' shoulder, while Kenji watched government communication channels. The news was spreading faster than anyone thought possible. Within 6 hours of the broadcast, protests started on 23 colonial stations. Workers left their jobs. Miners refused to load cargo. The entire belt threatened to strike unless the government leaders looked into the claims against Cain and did an independent investigation into police brutality. Kenji looked up from his screen with a serious face. "Government command just put out a warrant for your arrest. All of you. Terrorism and treason and unauthorized broadcast and theft of classified stuff. You are marked as hostile fighters. They have shoot-on-sight permission." He stopped. "They are also offering 5 million credits as reward, dead or alive." Maya expected this. What she did not expect was what Kenji said next. "But there is something else. Public opinion is split. Half the civilians are calling you heroes. The other half wants you dead. And the military," he stopped. "About 40% of active duty people are refusing orders to chase you. Some units are threatening to rebel if command does not deal with the Cain situation. You have created a government crisis." Palmer walked into the cargo bay, wiping oil from her hands. Her ship took damage during their escape, and it was small but concerning. "We have maybe 3 days before the long-range sensors find us. After that, we need a plan that does not involve dying in space." She looked at Maya. "I assume you have one." Maya pulled up a star map on her tablet. "There is a mining colony on Ceres. Independent operation outside government control. The owner, Victor Dunn, runs it tight, but he does not like Earth Authority. If we can get there, we might be able to ask for protection." Hayes made a sound with his shoulder freshly wrapped. "And if he decides to collect that reward money, then we fight. But I do not think he will. Dunn lost his son to a corrupt security force back on Mars. He might help us." The trip to Ceres took 4 days of hard flying with government ships always looking through the asteroid belt for their signal. Palmer had to change course 3 times in emergencies to avoid patrol intercepts. By the time they reached Ceres orbit, the Defiant Wind was running on fumes and prayer. Ceres Control was not friendly when they asked for docking permission. "This is a restricted facility. Tell us who you are and wait for inspection." Palmer smiled at Maya in a way that was not happy, then opened the channel. "Ceres Control, this is Captain Nicole Palmer of the Defiant Wind. My cargo is political and my passengers are wanted by the government for telling the truth. We are requesting protection under Article 7 of the Outer System Independence Charter. There is a reward on our heads and probably a fleet following us. So you can either let us dock or you can explain to Victor Dunn why you turned away people who stood up to the same system that killed his boy. The silence went on for almost 30 seconds. Then a different voice came over the radio, older and rougher. This is Dunn. Dock at Bay 7. But if you are lying about what you want, I will throw you out the airlock myself. The defiant wind settled into the docking cradle with a sound of stressed metal. When the airlock opened, Victor Dunn was waiting with 12 armed guards. He was a big man with gray beard and scars and eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. He looked at Maya for a long moment. I watched your broadcast. Watched it 3 times, actually. My boy Aaron was 17 when Mars Security killed him. They said he was resisting arrest. He was buying food. He looked at Hayes and Pierce and the others. You people just started a war against the most powerful organization in human space. You understand that. Maya looked at him steadily. We started a war against injustice. The government just happens to be protecting it. Dunn's laugh was bitter and sharp. Hell of a difference when they are shooting at you all the same. He pointed toward the inside of the colony. Come on. You look like you need food and a safe place to sleep. We will talk about what happens next. The mining colony was tunnels cut into Sirius's surface, simple and cramped but working. Dunn led them to a meeting room deep in the complex where a meal was already waiting. Real food, not the fake paste they had been eating on the ship. While they ate, Dunn explained the situation with brutal honesty. The government knows you are in the belt somewhere. They cannot search every rock, but they will find you eventually. When they do, they will come with force. I can hide you for a while, maybe a few weeks. But after that, you need to make a choice. You can run and keep hiding until they catch you. Or you can fight. Maya leaned forward. How do we fight an interstellar government? Dunn smiled, and it was not pleasant. You have already started. Those protests spreading across the colonies. That is momentum. That is power. People are angry. They have been angry for years, but nobody gave them permission to act on it. You did. Now the question is if you can turn that anger into something that changes the system instead of just burning everything. He pulled up a screen showing the colonial territories. There are a dozen independent mining operations like mine spread through the belt. None of us like the government watching us. Then there are the outer colonies. Titan and Enceladus and Triton. They are practically independent already. And the military units refusing to hunt you, some of them are at important facilities. If you could bring all these groups together, organize them into something real. Maya stopped him. You are talking about a rebellion. An actual armed rebellion against Earth. Dunn's face was serious. I am talking about forcing the government to reform or break apart. Either way, the current system cannot survive. Your brother's death showed something that cannot be hidden now. Now you have to decide if you are going to lead the change or let chaos take over. Maya looked at her team. Hayes wounded but determined. Pierce, who had lost his daughter. Kenji and Lisa, smart and young and idealistic. Palmer, cynical but committed. They had all given up everything for this moment. She thought about Carlos and his dreams of building a better future on Titan. Maybe this was how that future started, not with careful political talk, but with people refusing to accept injustice anymore. All right, she said quietly. Let us build a rebellion. The rebellion started small, almost by accident. Dunn connected Maya with other independent operators in the belt, old miners and freight haulers, who had spent decades hating government control. They met in secret chat rooms with their faces hidden by digital masks, sharing stories of extortion and harassment and violence by government authorities. Maya did not ask them to fight. She simply told them the truth about what happened to Carlos and the corruption she exposed, and the choice every person had between helping evil or fighting it. The response was huge. Within 2 weeks, the belt-wide strike that started on its own now had coordination and leadership. Cargo shipments to Earth slowed to almost nothing. Government stations found themselves short on water and oxygen and critical supplies. The economic pressure was huge and immediate, but Maya knew economics alone would not force real change. She needed allies with power and weapons and the ability to actually challenge government military forces. That is where Commander Sylvia Grant came in. Grant commanded the government destroyer Resolute, currently at Titan. She was a decorated officer with 30 years of service, and she was furious. Kenji had found her private messages to other senior officers expressing anger at Kane's protected status and demanding a proper investigation. Maya took a risk and contacted her directly through a secret channel. "Commander Grant, this is Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez. I know you are angry about the Kane situation. I know you have been trying to force accountability through proper channels. I am here to tell you those channels do not work. They are designed not to work. If you truly want justice, you will have to take it." Grant's response came 12 hours later. A video call with her face stern but not hostile. "You are asking me to commit mutiny, to turn my ship and crew against the government we swore to defend." Maya shook her head. "I am asking you to defend the principles that government is supposed to represent. Justice, equality, protection of the innocent. The government abandoned those principles when it protected Kane. When it protected hundreds like him. You can either serve a corrupt institution or serve humanity's future." Grant was silent for a long time. Then she asked the question that would define everything. "If I do this, if I bring the Resolute and any other ships I can convince, what is your goal? How does this end without massive death?" Maya had been thinking about that question every day since the broadcast. "We force the government to the negotiating table. We demand changes to the Constitution. Independent oversight of law enforcement. Real accountability. Term limits for the High Commission. Democratic representation for the colonies. And we demand it backed by the threat of total economic and military collapse if they refuse." Grant thought about this. That is ambitious. That is revolutionary. That is probably impossible. But it is also right. She looked away from the camera like she was weighing something heavy. "I have 42 ships in the Outer System Defense Fleet. I think I can bring at least 15 to your side. Maybe more. The rest will either stand down or fight us. Are you prepared for civil war?" Maya felt the weight of that question like gravity itself. "No. But I am more prepared for civil war than I am for continued injustice. Sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to cut out the infection even if the surgery is painful." Grant nodded slowly. "All right, give me 2 weeks to contact sympathetic commanders. We will coordinate a declaration at the same time. Multiple ships and multiple stations all at once. Make it impossible for High Command to stop. And Rodriguez," she added, "make sure your cause is worth what this is going to cost. Because once we start, a lot of good people are going to die." Maya understood. The cost was already unbearable. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was watching the cycle continue generation after generation, carrying humanity's worst failures to every world they touched. Over the next 2 weeks, the movement grew fast. Grant brought in 14 ships and their crews, almost 6,000 people, who decided their oaths meant defending justice, not protecting the corrupt. The independent mining operations made their alliance official, creating a mutual defense agreement. And on Titan and Europa and Enceladus, civilian populations started organizing local militias, arming themselves with mining equipment and makeshift weapons. The government High Commission watched this happen with growing alarm. They tried negotiation, first offering a formal investigation into Kane's conduct and promises of reform. But their credibility was destroyed. Kenji had leaked internal documents showing that the Commission knew about Kane's pattern of violence for years and actively covered it up. Trust was impossible. Then the Commission tried force. They sent the Second Fleet, 27 ships under Admiral Lawrence Stone, to the Belt, with orders to arrest the rebel leadership and restore order. It was a terrible mistake. When Stone's fleet arrived at Ceres, they found not a small group of criminals but a coordinated military force. Grant's ships had taken defensive positions around the mining colonies. Civilian freighters had been armed with makeshift railguns, and the miners themselves had fortified their bases with whatever weapons they could make or steal. Stone demanded surrender. Grant refused. The standoff lasted 3 days. Both sides knew that firing the first shot would start a cascade of violence that might tear human civilization apart. It was Stone who gave in first. He was a career officer, a good man who truly believed in protecting humanity. And as he looked at the rebel fleet through his display, he realized something important. These were not terrorists. They were patriots. They were people who had been pushed too far by a system that forgot its purpose. He opened a direct channel to Grant. "Commander, I am going to do something that will probably end my career. I am going to recommend that the Commission negotiate with you in good faith. And I'm going to refuse to fire on fellow humans who are demanding the same things I swore to protect." "Stand down," Grant replied. "Join us." Stone hesitated. Then slowly he broadcast to his entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Stone. Weapons offline. Defensive posture only. We are not starting a civil war over corruption." The Second Fleet stood down. And in that moment, Maya knew they had won. Not the war, but the critical battle that would make the war unnecessary. The government could not maintain control through force alone. They would have to change or collapse. Either outcome was better than what came before. The Government High Commission agreed to negotiations within 48 hours of Stone's defection. They had no choice, with a third of their military either in open rebellion or refusing to engage with colonial stations threatening full independence with Earth, itself having massive protests demanding reform. The Commission's authority had disappeared. The negotiations happened on neutral ground aboard the Resolute, with both sides bringing equal delegations. Maya insisted on being there, though Grant warned her that showing her face would make her arrest certain if things went wrong. She went anyway, flanked by Hayes and Pierce, representing not just herself, but every victim of the system they were trying to tear down. The Commission sent Director Helen Bright, a sharp political operator, who had spent 20 years navigating the complex bureaucracy of government. She looked at Maya with something between respect and hostility. "You have caused quite a crisis, Lieutenant. Millions of credits in economic damage, civil unrest across 40 installations, and now you are demanding constitutional reforms that would fundamentally reshape human government. I assume you understand the magnitude of what you are asking." Maya's response was calm. "I understand the magnitude of what I am refusing to accept. Systematic abuse, corruption, violence without accountability. You built a government that protects predators like Cain while silencing victims. If that system has to burn to build something better, then let it burn." Bright leaned back in her chair. "You speak about justice, but what you have done is threaten the stability of human civilization. Do you know how many people depend on government infrastructure for survival? How many die if supply chains collapse? How many if we descend into civil war? Your brother's death was a tragedy, but how many tragedies are you willing to create for revenge?" "It is not revenge," Maya said quietly. "It is accountability. And if your civilization cannot survive basic accountability, then it does not deserve to survive." The first week of negotiations was brutal. The Commission fought every proposal, offering small concessions while protecting the fundamental power structures that enabled the corruption. They would investigate Cain, they said, but resisted independent oversight. They would review police procedures but resisted civilian control. They would consider limited reforms but resisted constitutional changes. Maya and her allies held firm. They had leverage and they used it. Every day the negotiations stalled. More ships joined the rebellion. More stations declared independence. The economic pressure on Earth got worse. And perhaps most important, public opinion was solidly behind the reformers. The Commission's own propaganda had backfired. People had seen Cain's brutality with their own eyes. They understood that the system was rotten. The breakthrough came in the second week when Grant received intelligence that elements of the Earth military were preparing a hardline coup. Hardliners who wanted to crush the rebellion through overwhelming force regardless of casualties. It was the nightmare scenario, and it forced both sides to compromise quickly or risk losing control entirely. Bright returned to the table with a new proposal drafted in desperation but genuine in scope. The government would establish an independent inspector general's office with full investigative authority over law enforcement. All police body camera footage would be automatically backed up to secure public servers. Civilian review boards with binding authority would oversee all use of force incidents. Officers with multiple complaints would face mandatory psychological evaluation and potential dismissal. And most significantly, the government constitution would be amended to include explicit protections against abuse of authority and guarantee democratic representation for all colonial territories. It was not everything Maya had demanded, but it was real change, structural reform that would make future abuses harder to hide and easier to punish. She talked with Grant and Dunn and the other rebel leaders. They debated for 6 hours, weighing the proposal against their principles and their anger and their exhausted hope. Finally, Grant spoke for all of them. "It is not perfect, but it is progress. Real progress. And if we reject it, we risk civil war that will kill millions." Maya looked at the agreement again. She thought about Carlos and what he would want. Not revenge for its own sake, but a future where others would not suffer as he had. She signed the document. The rebellion was over. The reform was beginning, but there was still one piece of unfinished business. Officer Gregory Cain. Throughout the crisis, he had stayed in protective custody, moved between secure facilities, as the government tried to figure out what to do with him. The agreement said he would face trial under the new independent system with civilian oversight and full transparency. Maya insisted on attending every day of the proceedings. Kane was tried for 12 counts of murder, evaluated by psychologists who found him mentally fit but morally empty, and finally convicted on all counts. The sentence was life imprisonment on a maximum security facility on Ganymede, not death because Maya and her allies wanted to prove they were better than the system they opposed, but life without possibility of parole because some crimes demanded permanent consequences. At the sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Maya was the last to speak. She walked to the podium, looked at Kane, who sat unrepentant and silent, and spoke not to him but to everyone watching. My brother Carlos believed in humanity's potential. He believed we could build a civilization among the stars that was better than what we left behind on Earth. Officer Kane destroyed that dream when he killed Carlos. But Carlos's dream does not die with him. It lives in every person who stood up these past months demanding accountability. It lives in these reforms we have fought for. It lives in the promise that no other family will have to bury a loved one killed by someone who was supposed to protect them. Justice is not vengeance. It is the refusal to let cruelty go unanswered. It is the commitment to do better. And today, finally, we have taken a step toward that better future. She looked at Kane one last time. You took my brother from me. But you did not take his legacy. That belongs to everyone who decided your evil would not stand. She walked away from the podium and from Kane and from the courtroom. Behind her, justice was served. Imperfect and incomplete, but real. And that she thought was humanity at its best. Not perfect. Just willing to keep trying. The reforms took time to put in place. Bureaucracies move slowly even when motivated, and the government bureaucracy was vast and ancient. But change came grudgingly at first then, with gathering momentum as the new systems proved effective. The Independent Inspector General's office received thousands of complaints in its first month, evidence of how much abuse had been hidden. They investigated thoroughly, and dozens of officers like Kane found themselves facing real consequences for the first time. Maya herself faced a strange new reality. She was both a hero and a criminal. The charges against her for the broadcast and the rebellion had been dropped as part of the agreement, but many in the government still saw her as a traitor. Others saw her as the spark for necessary change. She could not return to military service, her career was over. But she found a new purpose. Grant offered her a position as civilian liaison for the newly reformed Colonial Defense Force. Her job was to travel between stations, document ongoing problems, and make sure the reforms were actually being done rather than just existing on paper. It was exhausting work, frustrating work, but important work. She threw herself into it with the same intensity she had brought to the rebellion. Hayes recovered from his shoulder wound and returned to station security, but this time with actual oversight and accountability. He became an advocate for reform within law enforcement circles, using his experience to argue that accountability made everyone safer, not just civilians, but officers too. He often said that the old system had protected bad cops while putting good ones in impossible situations. The new system tried to fix both problems. Pierce took a different path. He returned to Earth for the first time in years to help establish civilian review boards in major cities. His daughter's case was reopened under the new rules, and the officers responsible finally faced justice. It was too late for his daughter, but it was not too late for others. He channeled his grief into prevention, teaching communities how to use the new oversight tools effectively. Kenji and Lisa continued their work in communication security, but now they focused on protecting whistleblowers and activists throughout the colonial territories. They built encrypted networks that authorities could not break, making sure that future Maya Rodriguezes could expose corruption without giving up their lives. They called their organization the Carlos Foundation, named after the young man whose death had sparked everything. Palmer went back to her freighter running cargo through the belt as she always had. But she stayed in contact with Maya, sometimes helping transport sensitive evidence or people who needed to disappear. She remained cynical about government and authority and human nature, but even she had to admit that things were better than before. Not perfect, just better, and that was something. Dunn expanded his mining operation on Ceres, using profits to help establish more independent colonies throughout the belt. He became a vocal advocate for colonial rights, arguing at every opportunity that the reforms needed to go further, that true equality required full autonomy for frontier territories. He was probably right. The fight was not over. It would never truly be over. But the direction had changed. 6 months after Kane's sentencing, Maya returned to Europa Station for the first time since the rebellion. The station looked the same, gleaming and efficient, but something fundamental had shifted. She could feel it in the way people moved, the way they talked about authority. There was less fear, more willingness to question, to demand accountability. It was subtle but real. She visited Carlos's memorial in the Remembrance Garden. Someone had added new things, flowers and candles, and small notes from people she did not know. Messages of gratitude and solidarity and promise. Thank you for his sacrifice. We will not forget. Justice lives. She knelt beside the memorial, her hand against the cold stone. I did what I could, she whispered. I know it is not enough. It is never enough. But maybe it is a start. Maybe future generations will build on what we started. Maybe they will create the world you dreamed of. A shadow fell across her and she looked up to see a young woman, maybe 20 years old, standing nervously nearby. Excuse me, the woman said. Are you Lieutenant Rodriguez? Maya stood slowly. Just Maya now. The young woman held out her hand. I am Carmen Santos. I am a student at the Europa Academy. I'm studying civil engineering. I want to help terraform Mars, give humanity new places to live where we can start fresh. She hesitated. Your brother inspired me. His story, what he wanted to do, what you did to honor him, it made me believe that engineering is not just about building structures. It is about building a better society. I wanted to thank you. Maya felt something tight in her chest loosen a little. Carlos's dream had not died. It had spread and taken root in others and grown into something larger than any one person. That is what he would have wanted. She shook Carmen's hand. He would have been proud to know people like you are carrying his vision forward. Make it real. Build that better world. Do not let anyone stop you. Carmen nodded seriously, then walked away back to her studies and her dreams and her future. Maya watched her go, then looked back at the memorial one last time. The rebellion had cost everything. Her career and her innocence and her faith in systems she had trusted. But it had also given her something. Purpose. The knowledge that one person could make a difference, that silence was a choice, that justice was worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. She left the garden as artificial evening fell across the station. Behind her, Carlos's hologram smiled into the gathering darkness, forever young and forever hopeful. And ahead of her, millions of people across human space continued the work she had started, building toward a future where that hope might finally be justified. It was enough, not perfect, not complete, but enough to keep fighting for. And that was humanity at its best, flawed and struggling and occasionally magnificent, refusing to give up. Refusing to accept injustice, refusing to let the darkness win, always reaching for the stars and trying, however imperfectly, to deserve them. 5 years after the rebellion, humanity had changed, not completely and not perfectly, but undeniably. The reforms that Maya and her allies had fought for were now embedded in government law, defended by a new generation of leaders who had witnessed the crisis and understood the stakes. Police violence had not vanished, human nature being what it was, but it was rarer and always met with swift accountability. The message was clear throughout the colonial territories. Abuse would not be tolerated. Power demanded responsibility. Maya had spent those 5 years traveling, constantly monitoring implementation of the reforms, speaking at universities and training academies, documenting cases where the system worked and cases where it failed. She had become a symbol which she found both satisfying and exhausting. People wanted her to be perfect, to embody the revolution's ideals completely. But she was just human, as flawed and uncertain as anyone. She was on Titan when she got the message that would bring everything full circle. Commander Grant requested her presence on Mars for a ceremony, marking the 5th anniversary of the reforms. Maya almost said no. She had been to too many ceremonies, given too many speeches, shaken too many hands. But Grant insisted this was different. Important in ways Maya would understand when she arrived. Mars had changed dramatically in 5 years. The terraforming projects that Carlos had dreamed of helping with were in full swing, now transforming the red planet into something that might one day support open-air human life. Massive atmospheric processors dotted the landscape, slowly building pressure and temperature. Genetically engineered plants spread across the rocks, beginning the long work of creating soil. It would take centuries to complete, but the dream was real, now solid, inevitable. Grant met her at the spaceport, looking older, but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She had been promoted to Fleet Admiral after the crisis, given responsibility for implementing military reforms. They called her the conscience of the Colonial Defense Force, which she claimed to find embarrassing but secretly appreciated. She drove Maya to a new facility on the edge of the main colony. As they got closer, Maya saw that it was some kind of training academy, sleek and modern, with young recruits practicing in the courtyard. Grant pulled up to the main entrance where a crowd had gathered, including faces Maya recognized. Hayes and Pierce and Kenji and Lisa and Palmer and Dunn. Her old team scattered across the solar system but gathered here for this moment. Grant led her inside to a central hall where a large memorial had been installed. It was a wall of names, thousands of them carved in metal that gleamed under carefully placed lighting. Maya stepped closer and realized what she was seeing. These were victims. People killed by police violence over the past 50 years, their names finally acknowledged, their deaths finally recorded officially. And at the center, larger than the others, was Carlos Rodriguez, age 23, engineer, dreamer, brother. Maya's breath caught. Grant spoke quietly beside her. This is the Carlos Rodriguez Academy for Justice and Accountability. We are training the next generation of law enforcement officers, but we are doing it right. Every cadet who comes through here spends time studying these names, understanding the cost of failure, learning why accountability matters. Your brother's name will make sure that his death meant something, that it changed how we train, how we think, how we serve. A young cadet approached, nervous but determined. She could not have been more than 19, her uniform new and crisp. She saluted Maya formally, then spoke. Lieutenant Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you. I almost did not join the Colonial Defense Force because of what happened to your brother. I was afraid of what I might become, of the system I might serve. But then I learned about the reforms, about people like you who fought to make things better. This academy exists because of your courage. I promise I will honor that courage in everything I do. I will be the kind of officer your brother deserved to meet that night. The kind who protects rather than destroys. Maya did not trust herself to speak. She simply nodded, and the cadet saluted again before returning to her classmates. Hayes stepped forward, his scarred face gentle with understanding. It was never just about Kane, he said quietly. It was about building something better from the ashes. You did that, Maya, you and all of us. We built something that will outlast us. Pierce joined them, his eyes on the memorial wall. My daughter's name is up there. Third row near the top. Rebecca Pierce, age 17. For years I thought her death was meaningless. Just another tragedy swallowed by an indifferent system. But now, he pointed to the academy around them, now it means something. Now she is remembered. Now her death teaches others to do better. Palmer, standing a little apart as always, spoke with her usual bluntness. You know the best part about all this? It is not perfect. The system still has problems. Corrupt officials still exist. People still abuse power. But now they face consequences. Now victims have recourse. Now there is hope that things can get better instead of certainty that they will stay terrible. That is revolutionary. Not the violence, not the drama. The hope. That is what you gave people. Kenji and Lisa had created a digital archive of the rebellion, preserving every document, every message, every piece of evidence that had sparked the change. It was housed here at the academy, accessible to researchers and students, making sure that future generations would understand exactly what had happened and why. Lisa explained it with quiet pride. We cannot let people forget, not the victims, not the perpetrators, not the cost of change. This archive makes sure the truth survives even if we do not. Even if someone tries to change history, the evidence will remain. Dunn had brought something special for the ceremony. A piece of ice from Europa, carefully preserved from the station where Carlos had lived and worked. He placed it in a special container beside the memorial wall, where it would slowly melt and be cycled into the academy's water system. Your brother's home becomes part of this place's foundation, he explained, literally and symbolically. Everything we build here is built on his memory, on his dreams, on his refusal to accept a world where cruelty went unanswered. The ceremony itself was simple but deep. Grant gave a speech about the importance of remembering and learning and always trying to be better. Maya spoke briefly, her words aimed not at the important people there, but at the cadets who would study here. You wear the uniform of authority, she told them. That uniform is both a privilege and a burden. It gives you power that others do not have. Use that power to protect, not to hurt, to serve, not to control, to lift up, not to crush down. My brother believed humanity could be better than our worst instincts. Prove him right. Be worthy of the badge you wear. After the ceremony, Maya walked the academy grounds alone. She watched cadets training in de-escalation techniques, studying ethics and law, learning about unconscious bias and the psychology of power. These young people were being taught to question authority, including their own, to put civilian safety over officer pride, to see themselves as servants rather than warriors. It was everything she had fought for. Everything Carlos would have wanted. That evening, she stood on a balcony looking over the Martian landscape. The sunset painted the rocks in shades of red and gold, and somewhere in the distance, atmospheric processors hummed their patient song of transformation. Palmer joined her, offering a flask of something that was probably illegal but definitely warming. To Carlos, Palmer said, raising the flask. To Carlos, Maya echoed, taking a sip. And to everyone who fought for something better. Palmer nodded. You know what the really crazy thing is? This actually worked. Not perfectly. Not completely. But you started a fire that spread across the solar system, and instead of burning everything down, it forged something stronger. That is rare. That is special. That is worth the cost. Maya was not sure she agreed about the cost. She had lost so much. Her career and her innocence and her faith in easy answers. But she had gained something too. Purpose. Community. The knowledge that change was possible if people were willing to fight for it. And she had helped build a legacy for Carlos that would touch countless lives, that would shape the future of human civilization among the stars. As darkness fell over Mars, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From grief and rage to revolution and reform. From one woman demanding justice to a movement that had transformed society. From Carlos's death to an academy that would train officers to prevent such deaths. It was not the ending she would have chosen. She would have preferred a world where Carlos still lived, where none of this had been necessary. But in a universe that did not offer that choice, she had done the best she could. They all had. And that would have to be enough. Somewhere in the Martian night, young cadets studied their lessons, learning about justice and accountability, about the weight of authority and the price of failure. They learned about Carlos Rodriguez and thousands like him, victims who had become teachers, whose deaths demanded that the living do better. And maybe some of those cadets would grow into officers who lived up to that demand, who protected rather than destroyed, who served rather than dominated, who understood that true strength meant using power wisely rather than using it absolutely. That was the future Carlos had believed in. That was the future Maya and her allies had fought for. And every day in small ways that future was becoming real. The rebellion was over. The reforms were ongoing. The work would never truly be finished. But humanity had taken a step forward, away from its worst impulses and toward its better angels. It was messy. It was incomplete. It was imperfect. It was human. And for now, standing on Mars, watching the stars emerge in an alien sky, Maya decided that was enough. Not victory. Not vindication. Just progress. Just the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today, that children yet unborn might grow up in a society that valued justice over convenience, that honored the fallen by becoming worthy of their sacrifice. She raised her eyes to the stars, to the vast frontier humanity was slowly claiming. Out there on distant worlds and stations, people were building new societies. Some would succeed. Some would fail. All would struggle with the same fundamental questions about power and justice that had driven this crisis. But now they had an example, a precedent. A story about what happened when people refused to accept injustice, when they demanded better, and fought to make that demand real. The story of Carlos Rodriguez and his sister who loved him enough to change the world. It was not a perfect story, but it was true. And truth, Maya had learned, was the beginning of all justice. Everything else followed from that single essential commitment to see clearly, to speak honestly, to act courageously. Everything else built on that foundation. She turned away from the stars and walked back inside, back to the ceremony's aftermath, back to the community of people who had fought beside her and understood the cost. Tomorrow she would return to her work, monitoring reforms, documenting problems, continuing the endless struggle to make authority accountable. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of peace. A moment to honor Carlos's memory, not with grief but with gratitude. Gratitude that he had lived. Gratitude that his death had sparked something larger than revenge. Gratitude that his dream of a better humanity among the stars was slowly, imperfectly, magnificently becoming real. The academy would open its doors to cadets in 6 months. They would study under the names of the fallen, learning lessons written in blood and sacrifice. They would emerge as officers who understood that authority without accountability was tyranny, that power without responsibility was corruption, that justice delayed was justice denied. They would be imperfect. They would make mistakes, but they would be better than what came before. And their students would be better still. Generation after generation building toward the future Carlos had imagined. That was his legacy. That was her gift to him. That was humanity's promise to itself and to the stars. We will be better. We will do better. We will never stop trying to deserve the universe we inhabit. And in the end, that might be the most human thing of all. Not perfection, just the stubborn, defiant, magnificent refusal to give up on becoming worthy of our dreams. Maya returned to the memorial hall one last time before leaving Mars. The wall of names gleamed in the soft light, each one representing a life cut short by those who should have protected them. She touched Carlos's name gently, her fingers tracing the letters. 5 years ago, she had stood in a different place watching the man who killed him walk free. 5 years ago, she had made a choice to fight, rather than accept, to speak, rather than stay silent, to risk everything for the possibility of justice. That choice had changed the world. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. She walked out of the academy into the Martian dawn. The sky was lightening from black to deep purple, and in the distance she could see the first transports arriving with supplies and equipment for the terraforming projects. Carlos's dream was happening. Slowly and patiently, humans were making this dead world live, and in the process they were becoming something better themselves. The flight back to Titan took 3 days. Maya spent most of it working on her reports documenting problems she had found during her travels, making recommendations for improvements. The work was never done. There were always new challenges, new abuses, new failures of the system. But there were also victories. Officers who chose to de-escalate rather than use force. Communities that used the oversight tools to hold authorities accountable. Victims who got justice because the system now worked the way it was supposed to. When Maya arrived back on Titan, she found a message, waiting from Hayes. There was a situation developing on one of the outer stations, a young officer who had used excessive force during an arrest, and the local community was demanding action. The new system was being tested. Maya immediately booked transport to the station. This was exactly the kind of case that mattered. Not the dramatic confrontations, but the everyday choices about whether the reforms would actually work or just be words on paper. The station was small, a mining outpost on one of Saturn's smaller moons. The officer in question was a rookie fresh from training, nervous and defensive. The victim was a miner who had gotten into an argument over pay and ended up with a broken arm and 3 cracked ribs. Under the old system, this would have been swept under the carpet. The officer would have claimed the miner resisted. The case would have been closed. But under the new system, the body camera footage was automatically uploaded to the public server. The Civilian Review Board had full authority to investigate, and Maya was there to make sure the process worked correctly. She spent a week on the station interviewing witnesses, reviewing footage, meeting with the review board. The officer had made mistakes, letting his fear and anger control him, using force when words would have worked. But he was not Cain, he was not a predator. He was a scared kid who had been badly trained and put in a situation he was not ready for. The review board made their recommendation. The officer would be suspended without pay for 6 months. He would undergo additional training in de-escalation and conflict resolution. He would have to apologize publicly to the victim and the community. And if he ever used excessive force again, he would be permanently barred from law enforcement. It was fair. It held him accountable while giving him a chance to learn and do better. The victim accepted the decision. The community accepted it, and the officer hopefully would learn from it. Maya wrote up her report noting what had worked and what could be improved. This was the reality of reform. Not dramatic confrontations, but patient, persistent work to make sure the system functioned as intended. On her way back to Titan, Maya stopped at Europa Station one more time. She visited Carlos's memorial as she always did when passing through. But this time she noticed something new. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip, their teacher explaining who Carlos was and what his death had meant. The children listened with serious faces, asking questions about justice and courage and standing up for what was right. One small girl, maybe 8 years old, raised her hand. Did Maya Rodriguez ever get in trouble for what she did? The teacher smiled. She gave up her career and risked her life. Many people called her a criminal. But she believed that doing the right thing was more important than following rules that protected evil. The girl thought about this. I think she was brave. The teacher nodded. So do I. And because of her bravery, we live in a better world. A world where people like Carlos are protected instead of forgotten. Maya watched from a distance, feeling tears she had not expected. This was the legacy. Not just laws and systems, but the stories people told their children about what mattered and why. She left the memorial and headed to the transport hub. Her work would never be done. There would always be more stations to visit, more problems to solve, more fights to win. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt something close to peace. The journey back to her quarters on Titan gave her time to think. She thought about all the people who had been part of this story. Grant now leading military reform with the same determination she had brought to the rebellion. Hayes teaching young officers that accountability was not the enemy, but the foundation of trust. Peers helping communities find their voice and use the new tools to demand justice. Kenji and Lisa protecting those who spoke truth to power, making sure whistleblowers could expose corruption safely. Palmer still running her routes through the belt, still cynical but also still helping when asked. Dunn building his independent colonies and arguing that the revolution needed to go further. And all the others whose names she did not know but whose efforts mattered just as much. The protests and the strikes and the ships that stood down rather than fire on their fellow humans. The civilians who demanded change and the officers who chose to support that change. The victims who found their courage to speak and the communities that listened. It had not been one person's story. It had been humanity's story. Messy and complicated and full of moral compromises, but ultimately moving in the right direction. That night Maya could not sleep. She stood at the observation window of her quarters, looking out at Saturn's rings glowing in the distant sunlight. Somewhere out there on a dozen worlds and 100 stations, humans were living their lives. Some were good. Some were bad. Most were just trying to get by. But all of them now lived under a system that was slightly more accountable, slightly more worthy of the civilization they were trying to build. She thought about Cain locked away on Ganymede, spending the rest of his life paying for his crimes. She felt no satisfaction in his suffering. She had never wanted revenge. She had wanted change. And she had gotten it. She thought about Carlos and wondered what he would think of everything that had happened. Would he be proud? Would he think the cost was worth it? Would he forgive her for using his death as a weapon for change? She would never know. But she believed she had honored his memory in the only way that mattered, by refusing to let his death be meaningless, by fighting to make sure others would not suffer the same fate, by helping to build the better world he had dreamed of. The next morning, Maya received a new assignment. There was a situation on one of the Mars colonies, a potential abuse of authority, that needed investigation. She packed her bag, said goodbye to her small quarters, and headed to the spaceport. The work continued. It would always continue. But that was okay. Progress was not a destination. It was a direction. And as long as humanity kept moving in that direction, kept trying to be better, kept refusing to accept injustice, then Carlos's dream was alive. Maya boarded the transport and found a seat by the window. As the ship lifted off, she watched Titan fall away below her. The colony lights twinkled in the darkness, and she thought about all the people down there living their lives under laws that now protected them better than before. Not perfectly, but better. And better was enough. The transport accelerated toward Mars, and Maya pulled out her datapad to review the case files for her next assignment. Another officer, another victim, another test of whether the reforms would hold or crumble under pressure. She would do her job. She would document the truth. She would make sure the system worked. And if it did not work, she would fight to fix it. Because that was what you did when you believed in something. You kept fighting even when you were tired. You kept trying even when you failed. You kept moving forward even when the path was unclear. Carlos had believed that humanity could be better. Maya had turned that belief into action. And now millions of others were continuing that action every day in small ways. Officers who chose de-escalation over force. Communities that demanded accountability. Leaders who prioritized justice over convenience. Victims who found their voice. And children who learned from an early age that standing up for what was right mattered more than playing it safe. The transport reached cruising speed, and the stars outside the window became steady points of light rather than streaks. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of the past 5 years, the grief and the anger and the fear and the hope, the victories and the defeats and the endless compromises. She had changed the world, not alone but as part of something larger than herself, a movement of people who refused to accept cruelty as inevitable. who believed that humanity deserved better than its worst instincts, who were willing to fight and sacrifice and persist until that belief became reality. When she opened her eyes again, the stars were still there, constant and eternal. Humanity was reaching for those stars, building new homes among them. And slowly, imperfectly, magnificently, they were learning to be worthy of the journey. Maya returned to her work, reading through case files and making notes. Another station, another problem, another opportunity to make sure the reforms held. The work was never done. But that was the point. Justice was not something you achieved once and then forgot about. It was something you had to fight for every single day, and she would keep fighting for as long as she could. For Carlos, for all the victims whose names were now carved in metal on Mars, for the children learning about courage in school, for the future generations who would inherit the civilization they were building. The transport flew on through the black, carrying Maya toward her next mission. Behind her, the past stretched out full of pain and struggle and hard-won victories. Ahead of her, the future waited uncertain and challenging and full of possibility. And in the present, she did her work one case at a time, one reform at a time, one small act of justice at a time, building the better world that Carlos had believed in, making real the dream that had cost so much but meant everything, proving that even in the vast cold darkness of space, humanity could choose to be good.